Come and buy fresh fish from the sea. Come and buy. Ooh.
The elders say that destiny does not knock with polished knuckles. It comes quietly, like dawn over water, like hunger in the stomach, like a chance meeting that feels ordinary until it changes everything. In the old days, they say the river chooses who will drink from it, not the other way around. And so it was on a humid coastal morning, when the smell of smoked fish mixed with salt air and human sweat, that a story began. One that would test love, pride, and the stubborn justice of God. Before we go deep into this story, please let me know the country and time you are watching this video. I love to know how far my stories spread. Along the crowded shoreline of Makonda, a bustling African coastal town where wooden boats kissed the sand and seagulls screamed like gossiping neighbors, Zainab Afolayan stood barefoot beside her fish basin. She was 24 years old, slim from years of hunger rather than choice, with skin darkened by sun and labor and eyes that held more patience than hope. Her wrapper was faded, her blouse patched twice at the shoulder, and her hands smelled permanently of fish. Tilapia, croaker, mackerel, no matter how much she washed them in salt water. Each morning before sunrise, she joined other women at the docks, bargaining fiercely for fish she would later sell piece by piece, praying the sun would not rot her profit before evening came. Zainab's life had become a pattern she could trace with closed eyes. Wake before dawn, walk to the shore, buy fish on credit, sell fast, set aside money for her sick mother's medicine, save coins for her younger brother's school fees. Eat whatever remained, if anything remained at all. Love, dreams, rest, those were luxuries she had buried long ago with her father, who drowned at sea when she was 16. Since then, the ocean had fed her and punished her in equal measure. Some days it gave generously. Other days it reminded her that survival was not guaranteed. That morning, business was slow. The sun climbed higher, and buyers complained loudly about prices they knew were fair. Zainab's voice grew hoarse as she called out, fresh fish from the sea." Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she smiled anyway because bitterness scared customers away. As she bent to rearrange her basin, a shadow fell across her stall, wide, still, unfamiliar. She looked up instinctively, already preparing the polite smile she wore like armor. What she saw made her pause. The man standing before her did not belong to the shore. His clothes were simple but expensive, his shoes clean despite the sand, his posture relaxed but commanding. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly handsome in a way that did not beg for attention. His eyes, sharp, thoughtful, burdened, moved from the fish to her face, then lingered not with desire but with curiosity. Behind him stood a black luxury SUV, its engine humming softly like a restrained beast. Zainab felt her chest tighten. Men, like this, did not stop for fish sellers. They passed by in tinted windows, sealed away from smells and stories like hers. "How much for this one?" the man asked, pointing at a large silver fish. Zainab swallowed and named the price carefully, bracing herself for insult or dismissal. Instead, he nodded and handed her the money without bargaining. As she reached for change, his hand brushed hers lightly. She flinched, not from fear, but surprise. He noticed. Something flickered in his expression. "Keep the change," he said gently. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Names were personal. Names invited questions. But there was something about his voice, calm, unhurried, that disarmed her. "Zainab," she replied. He repeated it slowly, as if testing the sound. "I'm Karim Adewale." The name meant nothing to her then. She did not know that newspapers printed it weekly, or that his company's towers pierced the skyline of 3 cities. She only knew that his gaze held a tiredness that matched her own, though it came from a different kind of struggle. Karim studied her face, the way she stood straight despite exhaustion, the dignity poverty had not stolen from her. "I need your help," he said suddenly. Zainab stiffened. Help often came with hidden costs. She shook her head quickly. "I don't have money, sir." He smiled faintly. "I don't need your money." Then, lowering his voice, he added words that made the world tilt beneath her feet. "I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé. For a short time." The sea roared behind them, gulls cried overhead, and Zainab felt as if the shore itself had shifted. She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh, run, or scream. A billionaire's proposal, spoken beside a basin of fish, under a merciless sun. Fate, it seemed, had reached into the market with wet hands, and what it planned to take or give, no one could yet tell. The elders say when a drum beats in the forest, the wise listen twice before they dance. Zainab did not dance. She stood frozen beside her basin of fish, the man's words echoing louder than the waves behind her. Pretend to be his fiancée. The sentence sounded unreal, like something overheard in a passing bus, not something offered to a woman whose feet were cracked from salt water and whose future had always been measured in daily survival. She searched his face for mockery, for cruelty, for the familiar hunger of men who thought poverty made a woman cheap. But Karim's eyes held none of that. They held urgency, pressure, fatigue. "I can't," she said quickly, the words tumbling out as if she needed to say them before courage betrayed her. "You are mistaken, sir. I sell fish. I don't know your kind of life." Her hands trembled slightly as she rearranged the fish, pretending busyness. She had learned early that refusal, when done politely and quickly, often protected a woman better than explanations. But Karim did not move away. He only nodded as if he had expected resistance. "I know who you are," he said calmly. "That's why I stopped." He gestured lightly to her stall, the market, the sweat-soaked faces around them. "My father is forcing me to marry. He has chosen women for me like one chooses furniture. Wealthy families, loud smiles, empty conversations. I need time. I need peace. Just 3 months. Nothing physical, nothing dishonest beyond appearances." He paused, then added quietly, "And I will pay you well." The word pay hit her chest like a stone. Zainab felt anger rise, sharp and sudden. "I am not for sale," she said, lifting her chin. Karim's expression tightened, not offended, but regretful. "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm asking, not commanding." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a card and held it between them. "Think about it. I'll give you a safe place to stay, money every week, your family's needs covered. You won't sell fish during that time." He hesitated. "I can see you're carrying more than you should alone." Her breath caught. He could see that much? Images flooded her mind without permission, her mother coughing through the night, her brother's torn school uniform, the landlord's warnings, the fear of sickness without money. She hated herself for feeling tempted. She hated the world for making temptation wear such a kind face. Zainab shook her head again, more slowly this time. "I don't know you," she whispered. "You don't need to," Karim said softly. "Just help me breathe." The words lingered long after he turned and walked back to his car. Zainab watched the black SUV disappear into traffic, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. Customers returned, bargaining loudly, but her spirit drifted far from the shore. That evening, she sold less than usual. Her hands moved automatically, while her mind replayed his offer again and again. 3 months, safety, money, dignity without begging, and shame because she knew the price was not money alone. It was entering a world that had never been kind to women like her. That night in the single-room shack she shared with her mother near the lagoon, sleep refused to come. The air was thick, mosquitoes whining like restless thoughts. Her mother lay coughing softly on the mat beside her. Zainab stared at the ceiling, cracked and stained with old rain leaks, and wondered what kind of fate arrived in expensive shoes. She whispered a prayer she had learned as a child, asking not for wealth, but for guidance. When morning came, she was still awake, eyes burning, decision heavy in her chest. 2 days passed before she saw Karim again. He did not pressure her. He did not return to the market immediately. That restraint unsettled her more than persistence would have. On the third day, as she packed unsold fish into ice, his car appeared once more at the edge of the shore. This time she did not flinch. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and waited. Karim approached slowly, respect written in his posture. "Have you decided?" he asked. Zainab closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her mother's medicine running out. She thought of dignity, not the kind that starves, but the kind that survives. When she opened her eyes, she nodded once. I will do it, she said, but I have conditions. Kareem's shoulders relaxed slightly. Name them. No touching, she said firmly. No lies that will destroy my name, and when it ends clean. He nodded without hesitation. Agreed. He smiled then, a genuine smile that did not reach too far, as if he knew gratitude was fragile. Come tomorrow. I'll arrange clothes. We start slowly. As he left, Zainab felt fear and hope walk side by side inside her chest. She had stepped onto a road she could not yet see the end of. The sea behind her whispered, as if it knew something she did not. And far away, beyond the shore and the market, and the fish-scented air, destiny adjusted its grip. Because what awaited Zainab was not just love, but a test that would shake every promise she had been given. The elders say that when a poor person enters a palace, even the walls stare. Zainab felt that truth with every step she took the next morning as Kareem's driver dropped her in front of a glass-front boutique in the heart of the city. The place glittered like another world entirely. Bright lights, polished floors, cold air that kissed her skin and reminded her how long it had been since she felt comfort without fear. She stood outside for a long moment, adjusting her faded wrapper, suddenly aware of the smell of fish clinging stubbornly to her hands despite repeated washing. This was not her world. She belonged to open markets and shouting buyers, not silent doors that opened with a soft hiss. Kareem arrived moments later, dressed simply in dark jeans and a white shirt, as if he did not want his wealth to shout before he did. When he saw her hesitation, he smiled gently. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "Nothing here will bite you." She managed a small smile but said nothing. Inside, the sales attendants looked up, their eyes flicking quickly over Zainab before Kareem spoke calmly, "She's with me." Just like that, their expressions softened, respect replacing judgment. Zainab felt something twist in her chest. Not joy, but a quiet ache at how easily dignity could be borrowed when attached to money. They moved slowly through the racks. Kareem did not rush her. He sat nearby, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to offer a polite nod. Each dress she tried felt like a costume at first, too clean, too smooth, too kind to her skin. When she emerged in a soft green gown that hugged her frame modestly, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her from the mirror. Her posture changed without permission. Her eyes looked less tired. Kareem looked up then and paused. "That one," he said quietly, not with hunger, with respect. Zainab felt her throat tighten. No man had ever looked at her like that, like she was not something to endure or escape, but something worth seeing. They bought shoes, simple jewelry, comfortable clothes for staying indoors. Kareem insisted she choose freely. She kept wanting to say enough, afraid of the weight of his generosity, but he waved away her protests gently. "This is part of the agreement," he reminded her. Still, when they left the boutique, bags in hand, Zainab felt as if she were carrying more than fabric. She was carrying the beginning of a lie that needed to look flawless to survive. The apartment was in a quiet neighborhood far from the shore, where trees lined clean streets and silence lived comfortably. As the door opened and Zainab stepped inside, her breath left her body. The space was wide, calm, smelling faintly of citrus and something expensive she could not name. The guest room prepared for her had white sheets, a private bathroom, and a window that overlooked a garden she had never imagined entering. Her knees almost buckled. Kareem stood at the door, watching without speaking, understanding that words would only cheapen the moment. "This is yours," he said finally. "No one will disturb you." That night, alone on the bed, Zainab cried silently into a pillow softer than anything she had ever touched. She cried for her father lost to the sea, for her mother coughing in the dark, for the years she had swallowed pain like medicine. She cried because safety felt foreign, and because deep inside, she sensed that this arrangement, meant to be simple, was already growing roots in places neither of them had planned. Outside, the city slept peacefully. Inside her chest, a quiet storm began to form. The elders say that when a stranger enters a compound, the chickens know before the dogs bark. Zainab learned this truth the first evening Kareem took her to his family home. The mansion sat on a hill like a silent judge, its gates tall, its walls smooth and unwelcoming. As the car rolled in, Zainab's palms grew damp despite the cool air. She adjusted the modest dress Karim had chosen for her, simple, elegant, respectful, and reminded herself to breathe. This was part of the agreement, just appearances, nothing more. Inside, the house smelled of wealth and authority, polished wood, quiet power, old money that did not need to announce itself. Karim's father, Al-Haji Sule Adewale, entered the living room with the confidence of a man used to obedience. He was tall, broad, his eyes sharp, like someone who measured people quickly and accurately. When he saw Zainab standing beside his son, his face brightened in immediate approval. "So this is the woman," he said, smiling widely. At last. He took Zainab's hand warmly, his grip firm but not unkind. "You are beautiful and calm. I like that." Zainab lowered her eyes, respectfully murmuring greetings as she had been taught since childhood. She spoke little, choosing her words carefully. Karim watched closely, relieved by how naturally she carried herself. But not everyone was pleased. From the far end of the room, a pair of sharp eyes observed her silently. Saad Adawal, Karim's younger sister, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. She was stylish, confident, and used to controlling the room. Zainab felt the weight of that gaze like a blade against her back. Dinner passed with polite conversation. Al-Haji Sule asked about Zainab's background, her parents, her education. Karim answered smoothly where necessary, careful not to oversell the lie. Zainab nodded, smiled softly, and spoke just enough to appear modest and well-raised. Yet inside her chest, her heart beat fast with fear. One wrong word could shatter everything. When the evening finally ended and they returned to the car, Zainab exhaled deeply, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. "You did well," Karim said quietly as they drove away. She nodded but did not smile. "Your sister," she said carefully. "She doesn't like me." Karim sighed. "Saad doesn't like surprises," he replied, "and she doesn't trust easily." He paused. "Ignore her." Zainab looked out the window, watching the city lights blur. She had learned long ago that women like Saad did not need reasons to be dangerous. That night, alone again in her quiet room, Zainab lay awake listening to the distant hum of traffic. The comfort around her felt almost unreal, like borrowed time. She sensed eyes watching, judgments forming, secrets tightening their grip. The lie had entered a house where pride lived loudly, and somewhere within those walls a storm was gathering, one that would soon test whether humility could survive under the weight of wealth and envy. The elders say that when wealth sits at the table, envy eats from the floor. Zainab did not yet understand how quickly eyes could turn sharp when they sensed imbalance. In Karim's world, rumors traveled faster than respect, and kindness was often mistaken for weakness. Days after her first visit to the Adewale mansion, murmurs began to ripple quietly through elite circles. Questions asked with smiles, curiosity masked as concern. Who was the girl Karim brought home? Where did she come from? Why had she appeared so suddenly, like a secret carried by the tide? Said watched everything. She watched how Karim's posture softened around Zainab, how his voice lowered when he spoke to her, how he listened, truly listened, in a way he never had with the polished women his family once paraded before him. This disturbed her deeply. In Said's world, women like Zainab existed only as background noise. Fish sellers, street traders, invisible labor that supported the city without ever touching its power. Yet here was Zainab sitting in their father's living room, sipping tea from gold-rimmed cups, speaking softly, respectfully, without fear. It offended Saad's sense of order. One afternoon, Said's suspicion hardened into certainty when she spotted Zainab on the roadside, not in silk, not in heels, but barefoot with a basin of fish balanced expertly on her head. The sun burned above her, her hands moved quickly, her voice called out prices with quiet dignity. Said stopped her car abruptly, heart pounding with triumph. So this is her, she thought. The lie. She watched from behind dark glasses as Zainab sold fish to ordinary people, unnoticed by the world that now bowed to her borrowed elegance. That evening, Saad confronted Karim. "You lied to Dad," she said bluntly, blocking his path. "That girl is a fish seller." Karim stiffened but did not deny it. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "It doesn't matter," he said. "She's helping me." Said laughed bitterly. "You hired her," she snapped. "You brought a poor girl into our house to play queen." Karim's eyes hardened. "Be careful," he warned. "She deserves respect." Said scoffed. "Poor girls don't belong in our family," she said coldly. From that moment, Said became a shadow in Zainab's life. She asked questions disguised as kindness. She smiled with poison behind her teeth, and Zainab, sensing danger but lacking power, chose silence. But silence, the elders say, is sometimes mistaken for permission. And Saad was already planning how to expose the truth. The elders say humiliation is a fire, it burns hottest when witnesses gather. The day it came for Zainab arrived quietly, disguised as routine. She walked through her university campus with books held tightly to her chest, her thoughts focused on exams, on her mother's worsening health, on the fragile balance she was struggling to maintain. She did not see Said approaching until it was too late. Said blocked her path with practiced confidence. "So," she said loudly, ensuring nearby students slowed to listen, "this is where you hide when you're not pretending to be rich." Zainab froze. Students whispered. Phones lifted subtly. Saad's voice rose. "Did my brother know you sell fish again? Or is that your secret too?" Laughter rippled cruelly through the crowd. Zainab felt heat crawl up her neck, but she said nothing. Hunger had taught her restraint better than pride ever could. Saad continued, intoxicated by attention. "You think wearing expensive clothes makes you one of us," she sneered. "You're still a poor fish seller. Nothing changes that." The words struck deep, cutting through Zainab's composure. For a moment, she saw her mother's thin face, her father swallowed by the sea, the years she had swallowed shame to survive. Something inside her cracked, not loudly, but completely. Zainab lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Yes," she said, "I sell fish. I work honestly. I earn with sweat." She stepped closer. "You insult me because you think money is character. But money didn't teach you respect." The crowd gasped. Said faltered. Zainab continued, eyes blazing. "You walk loudly, but you stand on nothing. Try me again." Laughter exploded. Phones recorded. Said's face drained of color. She fled, humiliation chasing her like fire. Zainab stood alone for a moment, trembling, not from fear, but release. She had spoken, and once words leave the mouth, they cannot be returned. That night, Said went home burning with rage, and in her anger she chose the most dangerous weapon she had left. She went to her father. The elders say truth spoken in anger becomes a spear, not a mirror. Saad cried before her father, twisting facts with emotion, painting Zainab as a deceiver, a manipulator, a disgrace. "She hired herself into our family," Saad sobbed. "She fooled you." Al-Haji Sul listened in silence, his pride bruised deeper than his anger. To him, deception was the worst sin, especially deception that made him appear foolish. That evening, Karim returned home to a house thick with tension. His father stood waiting, eyes cold. "Is it true?" Al-Haji Sule demanded. "Is the girl you brought here a fish seller?" Karim inhaled deeply. "Yes," he said, "but she is more than—" "Enough," his father thundered. "You embarrassed me." Karim stood firm. "I love her." The room went silent. Al-Haji Sule laughed, a sound without joy. "Love," he scoffed. "She is using you." Karim's voice rose. "She saved herself before she ever met me." The argument burned deep into the night, father and son standing on opposite shores of belief. Finally, Al-Haji Sule delivered his verdict. "Choose," he said, "your family or that girl." Karim left that night with fire in his chest. He drove straight to Zainab's apartment. When she opened the door, fear flickered across her face, but Karim pulled her into his arms without a word. "I choose you," he whispered. Zainab wept, not from joy alone, but from the terrifying knowledge that love had now declared war. Outside, the city slept. Inside their lives, the storm had only just begun. The elders say that love, when tested, reveals the weight of the heart carrying it. After Karim chose Zainab openly, peace fled their lives like a frightened bird. What once felt like borrowed calm became a battlefield where every kindness was questioned and every step watched. Zainab returned to the apartment each evening with a tight chest, sensing invisible eyes on her back. In the markets, whispers followed her. In the city, strangers stared longer. She had not changed, but the world's gaze had. Karim tried to shield her, but wealth does not stop storms. It only attracts stronger winds. His father cut him off from family meetings. Business partners began acting distant. Invitations disappeared. Karim assured Zainab that none of it mattered, yet she saw exhaustion carving lines into his face. At night, when he thought she slept, she felt him lie awake beside her, staring into darkness, wrestling with consequences love had summoned. Zainab's heart twisted with guilt. She had survived hunger, insults, and loneliness, but this was different. Now her presence was costing someone else peace. One evening she whispered, "Maybe I should leave." Karim turned sharply. "Never say that," he said. "You are not a mistake." But she wondered. The elders say sacrifice often wears the face of responsibility. Then the call came. Her mother collapsed at dawn. The sea that once took her father now threatened to take her mother too. Doctors spoke quickly. Numbers fell like stones. Surgery, complications, money. Zainab felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She did not tell Karim immediately. She returned to the shore instead, fish basin balanced on her head once more, barefoot, heart breaking as she sold under the sun. She believed suffering alone was better than becoming a burden. But destiny does not stay hidden for long. The elders say no secret survives love. Karim found Zainab that afternoon on the roadside, calling out prices with a voice worn thin by desperation. Rage and fear crashed inside him at once. He stepped from the car, ignoring stares. "Why are you here?" he demanded. Zainab lowered her eyes. "I didn't want to trouble you," she whispered. Her restraint angered him more than rebellion would have. When she finally told him about her mother, the hospital, the impossible cost, Karim felt shame burn his chest. Not at her, but at the world that had taught her silence was survival. Without hesitation, he drove her to the hospital, paid every bill, signed every form. Zainab watched in disbelief as money moved like water from his hands, saving the life that had given her everything. Her mother survived. That night, as machines beeped softly and the smell of antiseptic filled the air, Zainab understood something deeper than love. Kindness, when sincere, does not humiliate. It lifts. She cried quietly beside Karim, and for the first time she allowed herself to lean without fear. But the same act of mercy that saved a life ignited fury elsewhere. When Al-Haji Sule discovered Karim had spent millions on the fish seller's family, his pride shattered. He saw betrayal where there was compassion. He summoned Karim home, not as a father, but as a judge preparing sentence. The reckoning had arrived. The elders say pride deafens the ear before it blinds the eye. When Karim stood before his father that night, the air in the mansion felt heavier than stone. Al-Haji Suli's voice cut through the silence like iron. "You have disgraced this family," he said. "You choose poverty over legacy." Karim did not bow. "I chose character over status," he replied calmly. The words landed like a slap. Al-Haji Sule raged. About bloodlines, about reputation, about poor people who cling when given help. Each word struck Zainab like a blow, even though she was not there. Karim defended her fiercely, describing her honesty, her endurance, her intelligence. His father laughed bitterly. What can a fish seller know? Days later, fate answered that question. A major business deal collapsed. Investors withdrew. Numbers refused to align. Panic replaced arrogance. Al-Haji Sul paced his study, shouting at advisors who failed him. Karim watched silently, then spoke. "Zainab can see what you are missing." The room went still. Desperation humbles faster than wisdom. Reluctantly, Al-Haji Sule agreed. When Zainab entered the study, head held high, hands steady, no one saw a fish seller anymore. They saw focus. She reviewed documents quietly, rearranged figures, corrected errors no one else had noticed. Within minutes, the solution stood clear. Silence followed. Al-Haji Sule stared at her, not with anger, but awe. And in that moment, pride began to crack. But acceptance does not come easily to men who once believed themselves gods. And though the door had opened, Zainab did not yet know what price pride would demand before fully stepping aside. The elders say that when a man finally bends, the earth listens. After the day Zainab corrected the figures that had threatened to ruin the Adawal Empire, the mansion changed its breath. Conversations softened. Voices lowered. Al-Haji Sul no longer barked orders with blind confidence. Instead, he retreated into thought, replaying the quiet competence of the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a fish seller. For the first time in decades, his certainty betrayed him. Pride had told him wealth created worth. Reality had answered otherwise. Zainab did not celebrate her silent victory. She returned to the apartment that evening drained, her mind heavy with the weight of having been seen too clearly at last. Karim noticed the quiet in her eyes and held her hands gently. "You did more than help," he said. "You changed him." She shook her head. "No," she replied softly. "I only showed him what was already there." Her humility unsettled Karim more than any argument could have. The elders say true strength does not announce itself, and Zainab carried hers like breath. Al-Haji Sule summoned Karim the following morning. The meeting was not loud. That frightened Karim more than anger ever had. His father spoke slowly, each word chosen with care. "I built everything I have with discipline," he said. "I believed hardship made people dangerous." He paused. "But that girl, she carries hardship without bitterness." Karim listened in silence, heart pounding. "Bring her," his father finally said, "not as a favor, as family." Zainab returned to the mansion with trembling hands. The walls that once judged her now seemed to wait. When Al-Haji Sule addressed her, his voice held something unfamiliar: respect. "I misjudged you," he admitted, "and a man who cannot admit error is already broken." Tears burned behind Zainab's eyes, but she bowed her head. She did not remind him of his cruelty. She did not demand apology. Grace spoke louder than accusation. Yet acceptance, once earned, does not erase enemies. Said watched the shift with growing panic. Power was slipping from her grip. The family no longer echoed her contempt. She felt replaced, overshadowed, diminished. And envy, when cornered, becomes reckless. As reconciliation bloomed quietly, Said prepared one last act, one final attempt to tear down what humility had built. The elders say that when poison fails to kill, it returns to the cup it came from. Saad's desperation drove her into choices that could not be undone. She leaked old lies, twisted stories, and whispered accusations into elite circles, hoping to stain Zainab's name beyond repair. But something had changed. People listened politely, and then verified. The truth no longer hid behind wealth. And slowly, Said's own secrets surfaced. What began as whispers grew into revelation. Financial misconduct, reckless associations, hidden debts paid quietly by the same father she accused of blindness. When Al-Haji Sule discovered the extent of Saad's deception, the pain struck deeper than anger. "I defended you," he said quietly, disappointment heavier than rage. Saad collapsed into tears, excuses spilling uselessly. But the elders say consequences do not negotiate. Saad was sent away, to reflect, to heal, to face herself without mirrors that lied. The household grew quieter. Zainab watched the downfall with sadness, not triumph. "I never wished her harm," she told Karim. "I only wanted peace." Karim kissed her forehead gently. "That is why you were chosen," he replied. Weeks later, the Adewale mansion hosted a gathering unlike any before. Not loud, not boastful, a celebration of gratitude. Al-Haji Sule stood before guests and spoke words no one expected. "This family stands today because humility entered our door," he said, his gaze resting on Zainab. "She is not an addition, she is a blessing." Applause rose, not forced, but genuine. That night, under soft lights and quiet music, Karim knelt before Zainab. No crowd, no performance, only truth. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not as rescue, not as charity, but as my equal." Zainab's tears fell freely as she whispered yes. The sea that once took her father now roared gently in the distance, as if bearing witness. But every story must be taught before it rests, and Zainab's journey was not yet complete. One final chapter remained, where wisdom would be sealed and the elders' lesson spoken aloud. The elders say a river that survives the dry season will never fear drought again. Zainab stood on the shore on the morning of her wedding, watching fishermen haul nets heavy with life. The smell of fish no longer reminded her of shame or survival alone. It reminded her of resilience. In the mornings, she refused to give up, of dignity earned one day at a time. Her mother stood beside her, healthy, smiling, eyes full of gratitude. "You carried hardship without hatred," she said. "That is why God lifted you." Zainab held her hand tightly, knowing how close she had come to losing everything. The elders say blessings that come after patience stay longer. The wedding was simple, elegant, and filled with laughter. Al-Haji Sula gave Zainab away with pride, his voice steady as he said, "She taught this family what money never could." Karim held her hands and whispered, "Nobody could stop us." Zainab smiled, "Because we did not stop ourselves." As the sun dipped into the sea, drums echoed softly. Children danced, fishermen passed by and waved. Zainab did not forget where she came from. She built schools near the shore. She funded women traders. She returned dignity to labor that had always fed the nation quietly. And so the elders end this story with wisdom earned, not borrowed. The heart that stays honest will never remain poor forever.